Can I just thank you very much, all of you, for joining us both in person as well as online tonight and on Teams. So it's our very first WiTT event since the beginning of lockdown. The person hybrid in this. So it's very nice to have all of you, and I hope that this will carry on. Our next event is in May, and it's going to be a cyber event. We're not quite sure where. It's mid-May where it's going to be held, but we hope that it will also be able to be in. We've had a number of Zoom meetings over the last couple of years, the last one on the metaverse. And if you look on the WiTT website and click the YouTube link, you can see the event. Annette very kindly chaired that, and it's gotten great reviews. I haven't had a chance yet to look at it, but it's on my list of things to do.
We're going to learn about the metaverse.
Ask Annette. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Stephanie Liston. I founded WiTT in 2000 because I was lonely, and I remain a director, but I handed over to Audrey Mandela, who is very capably taking it on about 10 years ago. And Annette Nabavi is also on our board, and Michelle Senegal de Fonseca, who I'm hoping will rush into the room shortly, since she hasn't indicated that she isn't. So I've been a partner in a number of private law firms and in the communications and technology area, and I'm now on a board sort of focusing on bringing communications and technology to those, my knowledge of that, into those boardrooms, including I chair the Jersey Competition Regulatory Authority and the Broadband Stakeholder Group, which we have an executive meeting tomorrow. And I also am a senior advisor to Frontier Economics. And the other you've met Annette Nabavi, one of our directors, and Audrey, and we'll hopefully see Michelle shortly. Unfortunately, Yasmin Majid and Helen Kaliski couldn't be with us, not because they have COVID, but because they had other things they needed to do, both with in Canada and then also at Google. So I'd like to thank Matt Evans from techUK and Julian David and Alex Mather, our new head of the BSG, for allowing us to use the techUK offices and joining us. We have some excellent speakers on our panel. Kim Viljoen, Marketing Engagement Director, Digital Inclusion, Mobile for Development from the GSMA. Camille Mendler, who's Senior Analyst at Omdia. And Dr. Michael Short, Chief Scientist for the Department of International Trade and founder of the GSMA, and, though he didn't tell me, a winner of a 2022, 2021, and 2022 GLOMO Award, which he started 25 years ago. That is, when
I think he knew
Exactly.
then. He's like, I worked hard.
So his award is for 25 years of connecting people, which I can tell you, if you ever someone from anywhere, call Mike.
Yeah.
On that, yeah. And he's always a stalwart on our panel for reviewing Mobile World Congress, because not only do you have this year's person, but you also have a long perspective. Just me.
To some degree, yes.
The nicest possible way. So I asked each of the panelists to spend a few minutes their highlights. We also, and then we'll have a discussion and have questions from the floor and from those that aren't on the floor but are coming, who are with us in spirit and online. Before we begin, our program, on a somber note, I'd like to reflect on world events. So it's pretty hard to leave those out tonight. Lockdown since the spring of 2020 and the Ukrainian, hi Penelope, and the invasion of the Ukraine by Russia on the 24th of February. The World Congress kicked off. I think it's fair to say that all of us have been deeply fortunate to live in a period of free travel, relative prosperity, and peace, with independent sovereign nations and democracy flourishing. And I won't make any comment about Donald Trump, even though I'm American. But I think, what's happened now in Ukraine has been a wake-up call for all of us. And I also think the pandemic has made us all take a step back and examine our lives and choices. It hasn't gone away yet, as even though restrictions may have eased. And we have two speakers that unfortunately are not able to join us in person today, Cristina Data from Ofcom and Trisha Dooley from Ericsson, though Cristina is very kindly, even though she has COVID, has agreed to chime in on what Ofcom's top 3 issues were. I think that it's just a reminder to be safe and look after the health and safety of others and our own safety as well. And on the invasion of Ukraine, it's been shocking and a real wake-up call. Mobile World Congress 2022 began 4 days after the Russian invasion, and I really applaud the GSMA, as I'm sure you do, for, quote, strongly condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine, recognizing in light of the emerging situation and considering the tragic loss of life, that Mobile World Congress seems immaterial under the circumstances. I also applaud the GSMA for excluding the Russian pavilion in light of what happened. And Ericsson and Nokia also declared that they would not supply Russia with any of their products. So I think that hopefully made some kind of significant statement in that context. We've seen a number of initiatives to keep mobile and internet up and running in Ukraine, and we've all seen a lot of footage in the Ukraine. So we know the mobile internet is still up, though I know, had a number of outages along the way. And I think the GSMA has always been a real unifying event. And I think hopefully that vision and the ecosystem and connectivity will help us through some of the dark times I suspect we have ahead. And so before I hand over to our speakers this evening, a few thoughts from me. I wasn't able to attend Mobile World Congress this year, so I feel a bit of a fraud, which is why it's, chairing is always a wonderful thing because you can hand over people who have firsthand experience. But from what I've taken stock of all the materials that are online, etc., I really think it should be called Digital World Congress. So I think that's a point Mike made a year or so ago, but I think it's even more so. I saw a lot of the photos and footage. It really has become much more, and seeing Amazon in such great numbers and space, I think it's overwhelmingly digital. I think now, if I may, before I turn to Kim, I'll turn over to Cristina. So if you could turn your mic on and give us your top issues from Ofcom's perspective.
Yes. Hello. Thank you, Stephanie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Fantastic. I can see you. I don't know whether you can see me. I can see other people online. So I'm really sorry. I cannot
see
there with you. Really gutted not to be able, having done the Mobile World Congress in person and having benefited from seeing a lot of people. I'm really sorry not to be there with you. So thank you very much, Stephanie, for the kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. So you might all have seen on LinkedIn and on various social media Ofcom top 5. I'm actually going to select my top 3 sort of areas that I possibly are the one that resonated with me the most, and then I'm going to use just an additional one. I come from Spectrum Group at Ofcom, so there is a little bit of a Spectrum angle that I need to bring to this audience. But in summary, I think what I saw a lot of was automation, so the use of artificial intelligence to support networks, to make them more efficient, and to make them more efficient with a view to sustainability as well. So I think that I attended many different panels and had separate discussions in which everyone was saying, oh God, we need to make sure that we can improve how we use the resources that we have at our disposal in a way to manage better our cost, but also manage our energy consumption. And in particular, a panel close to my heart with regard to spectrum. The more you use spectrum bands to deliver mobile connectivity, actually the more power you need. So you need to find a better way to optimize optimize the way you use the resources so that you can deliver a solution that is fit for purpose in an agenda that needs to deliver net zero, particularly in the UK by 2050. Another area of a lot of interest to us has been private networks. Stephanie, you've mentioned Amazon. Amazon had a very, very big space taking, and I met with a few colleagues from Amazon about the future of private networks. They have launched in the US a private 5G network, which you can switch off with a button, basically. So private networks are finally becoming a reality. There are many people competing in that space. Microsoft of this world with Azure, Amazon with AWS, etc. So, and MNOs themselves who want to a slice of the pie, and who have got sort of some strengths, but also some weaknesses in delivering that type of product. So it seemed like the year in which private network were on every single stand. Almost everybody wanted to have some action in it. Quite on the back of quite a few forecasts that we've all seen out there saying how much private network will be important. And Stephanie, you said call it digital. Yes, they will be important for the digital transformation of all of the sectors of the economy in very different way, shape or form. So again, quite an important area for us. And the sort of last top level one was an Open RAN. I think a lot more presence from Open RAN supplier, but also from user of Open RAN. Clearly, much easier in a sort of greenfield operator. So I've listened to a few sessions by Dish, Rakuten Symphony, Fujitsu working with Dish in the US, outlining the benefit of an Open RAN approach. Slightly more sort of complex in the context of brownfield operators that already got solution out there, but clearly the announcement that happened during Mobile World Congress of Vodafone targeting 30% of their base to be Open RAN is quite a strong message with regards to the future of this technology, what it can enable, and the flexibility particularly that it can enable. I was quite sort of impressed by a discussion between Dish and Fujitsu, where the two sides of that relationship were saying how much having an open discussion actually enables innovation that is almost ongoing innovation as they deploy a new solution. So quite present there. Again, the sort of finally potentially hitting a little bit of a platform for growth. And then, as I said, there is a little area of spectrum that normally is not very present at Mobile World Congress, because yes, it's the critical enablers, but in a way it's more discussed in the back room, but in the front room. I think in the context of a growing mobile and wireless broadband demand, I would say. So the new metaverse was on the mouth of everyone out there, etc. Is also the fact that both the Wi-Fi community and the mobile community are starting to target similar bands. So there is growth. All of the spectrum is being used. Everyone is targeting the same type of spectrum. So I think it was quite a strong presence from both sides at Mobile World Congress debating spectrum issues, which was, to be honest, in the front room a little bit of a first from my experience of Mobile World Congress. So in summary, a lot of AI, machine learning for automation, and in the end for sustainability purposes. Private network finally hitting the sort of tipping point potentially, and similarly Open RAN hitting the tipping point of becoming a reality across the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cristina. Your contribution from afar, and I hope you feel better. And if you would like to stay with us, people may have some questions at the end.
Absolutely, not a problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to turn over now to Kim Viljoen, who's going to give us the perspective from the GSMA. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about your role with the GSMA.
Yeah, sure. So firstly, my role, so I'm the Market Engagement Director across our Digital Inclusion Program. So everyone knows about the GSMA being the the Industry Trade Association, but within the GSMA, we have this beautiful department called Mobile for Development, and essentially we work on driving social good business and reaching underserved populations in particular across a number of different sectors and content areas. The sectors that I work more closely on or the areas that I work more closely on is gender inclusion now, and another team that we call Connected Society, essentially working on the topics of connectivity, rural connectivity in particular, but then more importantly, digital inclusion of underserved populations, including people with disabilities. And we primarily work across low and middle income markets. So maybe before I get to this MWC, let me take a step back and just reflect on my experience of the last 2 years, but probably most of the GSMA's feelings about the last 2 years. So we were one of the first big conferences to be cancelled back at the start of the pandemic, and it was a huge deal for us. So for those who are not familiar with GSMA, we run a number of events across the world, and this is our flagship one. So MWC is our baby. We love MWC. We've all enjoyed the experience of being there in person, loving the tapas in Spain and all the other wonderful things that come with the conference. And so for that to be cancelled at the start of the pandemic was a really huge deal for us. And just not knowing all that uncertainty that came with that, not knowing what the next year would hold. And then obviously we managed to get a light touch version, we'll call it that, June last year. So we pushed out the event from February to June, summer event. And it kind of did give us a boost of confidence that in-person events could become a reality again. But I would say that this year's event was very much what we all needed, I think, especially the timing coming, as you said, 4 days after the invasion of Ukraine. I think it was difficult to move forward with that happening, but I mean, a tremendous amount of work and effort that went in from all of the GSMA and all its partners, really. And so this event was really, we needed this to be a success, and it really was. I think the numbers speak for themselves. So we had over 61,000 participants from 183 countries. And I think the most repeated statement I've heard is that MWC got its buzz back. So basically there was that vibrance, that sort of excitement about all the new tech and everything that the conference is usually about. So despite parallel events, I think we could really feel there was that same old MWC character that we all knew pre-pandemic. So the numbers are not quite back at pre-pandemic levels. So I think the peak was around 100,000 attendees. So we're not there yet, but we have many reasons to believe that this will continue to be an in-person event largely, and next year we're likely to see increase in those numbers as well. And I think there was also a lot of statements around people being happy to be back in person, a lot of connections being made, obviously a lot of business as usual. And I think the one stat that I really like is 74,000 LinkedIn connections made via MWC app, which doesn't seem like much. But if you think of it, that's 74,000 connections that wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the event. And I just think of the potential that follows that. I mean, especially if you're LinkedIn connections here, then the multiplier effect is huge. So I think for this platform specifically, it's always worth reflecting on the gender representation. So of attendees, 25% were female attendees, so women participation at the event. And then obviously for speakers, that was even higher, it was at 36%, which is comparable to pre-pandemic levels. So still obviously work to be done there, but really pleasing to see that representation. So this obviously was a hybrid event. So we had across the period of the event, we had over 500,000 unique views of session content globally. So it just goes to show that whilst obviously there's a lot of value of being in person, I think the reach of getting that content out there, having people being able to stream live is just amazing. And that was during the event. That content, by the way, is still live. If you want to go and actually access it, you can up until the end of March, I think. So it's just amazing to see that kind of reach. So we heard a few key themes around spectrum and so forth. So I'll just quickly reflect on the key themes, not going into too much detail. I'm going to pass that on to you guys there. So the overarching theme, connectivity unleashed. I'm not going to pretend I remember all of these themes off by heart, but 5G Connect, advancing AI, CloudNet, FinTech, Internet of Everything, Tech Horizon, and I will say there were whispers of 6G. Again, there was a little bit last year, and obviously lots of chat about the metaverse, which a lot of us are just like, hang on, we just want to get 5G advanced wrapped up and just kind of get comfortable in this space. But actually, it was one of the things that made me remember why I love MWC. Is it's this playground where you can really just start dreaming about, not now, but like, what is the next, 10 years on, what does it start to look like? And I think it's a pity we don't have Ericsson here, because they did a very good job with their in-person experience. They did an Imagine, so they were kind of running through different use cases of the metaverse, and it was super cool. And actually, you can view a lot of it online if you wanted to go and have a Google. But from the GSMA perspective again, so I won't go into those themes. I'm going to quickly touch on some things that Matt Spaniard mentioned. So Director General of the GSMA mentioned in his keynote address. So the first one is around verticals. And you mentioned, it should be a digital conference, because really mobile is now being an enabler for a number of other sectors, businesses, and these sorts of things. So that will be a key focus. So he mentioned 3 key focuses of the mobile industry going forward. And one is the mobile as an enabler of other sectors, other verticals. The second, and this is one I'm going to double down on a little bit, because it's one we're particularly passionate about in my team, but it's the usage gap. So I'm going to take a step back quickly, because there's something bigger than the usage gap, which is the unconnected population. And essentially, this is the population who are either not covered by a broadband network or are not currently using mobile internet. So they live within a broadband network coverage, but they're not actually using and benefiting from mobile internet. And actually, that's half of the global population that are unconnected. So within that, I mentioned obviously those who are covered but not using mobile internet. So we refer to this as the usage gap. And that's currently 43% or 3.4 billion people globally who are not using mobile internet. We know that the unconnected are disproportionately poorer, uneducated, rural, persons with disabilities. And anyone want to take a guess at the 5th aspect or attribute of the unconnected population? Female. Okay, got it. So obviously women significantly less included than men. So according to the GSMA Mobile Gender Gap Report, the latest one, 234 million fewer women in LMICs are using mobile internet in comparison to their male counterparts. And our research has also evidenced a mobile disability gap, and women with disabilities in particular are at greatest risk of being left behind, because they have the lowest smartphone ownerships, lowest usage of mobile internet, and so forth. So really, like when it comes to women and their inclusion, there's some significant efforts required to bridge that gap. So we have a huge opportunity, a huge responsibility to do something about this. We've already evidenced a number of barriers, and these were touched on at different points along the conference, but affordability is a big one. Knowledge and skills, relevance of content, safety and security, and then the last one is around access, which also has to do network and other enablers for the use of mobile. The third and my final one, then I'll pass on. The third thing that Matt's touched on was innovation, which obviously is a big one for addressing the usage gap, but innovation in general and in making the most or in optimizing all the opportunities that things like 5G, 5G Advanced, 6G, and the metaverse will bring about. But one of the key things that I love about MWC is the 4 years from now event, which runs parallel to the conference, usually at another venue. This year, they actually embedded it in the venue, which I think was a great move. And so essentially, 4 years from now, the title says it all. It's all the startups that in 4 years from now, we should be expecting much, much bigger things from. So we had several of so we have an innovation fund for mobile internet adoption and digital inclusion. So we had 9 of our grantees across 2 rounds. So we also have an innovation round for assistive tech who actually participated at the event. And I think it was just such a refresher for me to hear from them the value of that event. So they actually, one of them in particular, had to extend their trip because they got so many opportunities that popped up. And I love that we were taking people from well, in this case, it was Pakistan, who wouldn't usually have that level of exposure, coming to an event like this and just having all these opportunities pop up. And I will say that this particular grantee was DevTalk. So they enabled for us what was my highlight of the event, at MWC first. We actually were able, because DevTalk provide on-demand sign language interpretation via an app, which is super cool if you want to communicate with someone who only speaks sign language. I'm not very good at that. But yeah, so they actually provided sign language interpretation for all the keynotes and other sessions at MWC. And for us, it's a very delayed step. There's many others who've done sorts of things like that, but it was a huge step for us to actually speak about digital inclusion more confidently, actually demonstrating what it can look like. So yeah, I think I'll stop there and you guys can pick up on your points. Is that?
Thank you,
Okay.
Kim. So, Camille, senior analyst for.
Yeah, hi, I'm Camille Mendler. I'm chief analyst at Omdia. We're a research and consulting firm. And in my job, my remit is to help service providers with their enterprise strategy, how their enterprise portfolio, their B2B portfolio is going to evolve. And one of the exciting things about Mobile World Congress is it's changed over the years. It's become more of an enterprise focused show. Actually, I've only been going to the show about 12 years, actually. Yeah, that's not that long compared to other people here, but it's, the amount of time that's spent on, speed dating and entertainment versus, real work is the balance has gotten higher towards the enterprise space, which is great. And this year was even more very much enterprise focused. But before I get into the detail of that, I just wanted to emphasize what you said, just in even more detail. As someone who goes to a World Congress, there was a real palpable sense of positive energy, optimism, and I don't think that was misplaced. I mean, I've lived through crashes and burns and various industry problems in the past. That's how I became an analyst. I lost my job at a startup and Audrey helped me out and helped me become an analyst a long time ago. Thank you very much, Audrey. Appreciate that. But I think it's rational, and just to make the point that the mobile operators, the telecom operators, have actually, as an industry, revenues are up. Revenues have not been up for they've been fairly flat with a few exceptions, but they've actually been up in a palpable way. Realization of the dependency of economies on this digital fabric. So I think that's really great. And you talk about innovation. Just another point I wanted to make is enterprises during the pandemic have changed their attitude to technology. I mean, there's always been a drive for digital transformation, but would it interest you to know that enterprises are rewriting the sort of what's known as the diffusion of innovation curve, which is something that came up which was defined in 1962 by a guy called Everett Rogers, who basically said, the way that ideas spread and technologies are adopted, follow a particular pattern, and either you are an innovator, you're an early adopter, you're early majority, late majority, or a laggard. Now, normally people who describe themselves as innovators are like, 2.5% of the population. That has changed fundamentally. So enterprises today, from what we've done recently, are rewriting that curve. They're more likely to describe themselves as innovators and early adopters. And so now we're in a situation where service providers, vendors need to capitalize on that. And so when I went to Mobile World Congress, I was expecting to see where we take this, because there's really a beneficial feeling about where we can take technology, and so there's a legitimate growth ambition, and a lot of it is around 5G, which is great. Now, Cristina already mentioned private networking. I can tell you right now, from broader work that we do, most of it is not 5G based. It is LTE, which is fine. That's not a problem. But if you step back and think about why is private networking sort of part of the zeitgeist of Mobile World Congress, it's partly because enterprises are trying to exert greater control over their digital environment. They want to define that because they've not been given the tools to do so. This gives them the depth of controls as their businesses become driven around that. But what's interesting about this year's Mobile World Congress is there's been a lot more of a rational approach to things like private networks. Not only the democratization of spectrum around the world is happening, but from a vendor perspective, what we saw at Mobile World Congress is a rational approach to how people might adopt private networks, and specifically how private networks, which are LTE or 5G based, might interact with other technologies like Wi-Fi. So I was very intrigued to see, HPE, Cisco, Extreme, those types of companies talking about an approach that means you choose the technology that suits your environment, so there's no great leap forward, that you can migrate at your own pace, that maybe you'll have this technology in one place and another in another place. And I think that's a very rational approach. So that I was very positive about that. Everyone and their aunt wants to be in the private networking space. Now, actually, the numbers tell you something different about how much that market is going to be worth, right? We can debate how much that market's going to be worth. But there is also, besides private networks, the other area of interest that I saw was slicing, which there are different ways of describing slicing. Some people might say it's a virtual version of a private network, potentially. And there are various examples of slicing that I saw on various stands around the show. But I don't believe this is an off the shelf. This is not something that's point and click and off the shelf yet. So there's a lot of work to be done. And what I've been saying is, I don't see a snackable slice available yet, but we're getting there, hopefully. But the other area that I think we need to do, whilst you saw a lot around verticals, vertical activity is really great. I think a lot of it is still theoretical rather than real. One example that I wanted to draw out, lots of really great examples out there, but the Telefonica stand, the Telefonica was amongst service providers, made a real effort to try to show different use cases. But I tell you, the crowd's more around the robot 5G controlled barman than they were around the 5G proctology example. Right? And that's because we want the sexy stuff. We do. But actually what's going to sell is probably more banal, right? Just like when we talk about the metaverse, and I just hasten, everyone who did not listen to the WiTT metaverse discussion the other day should do so, because it really was fantastic. People think of the metaverse as purely for entertainment, when there's lots of business to business type of implementations. Now, of course, at Mobile World Congress, and I'm not going to embarrass people by showing photos and video, though I do have them. The metaverse was very much about grown men wearing sort of helmets and tactile gloves, dancing in a virtual disco with quite young Korean girls. I mean, it was fun. It was silly. And there was also, there was a lot of, roller coaster action. There usually is a bit of roller coaster action. Yeah. Right. But I just think we do ourselves perhaps a slight disservice of showing the metaverse, which is so profound. And by the way, when you do speak to enterprises, about what they're doing in augmented reality and virtual, there's a ton of stuff actually going on. Maybe not be fully immersive like metaverse would suggest, but there's a lot going on. So I think we might do ourselves a slight disservice on that front. What else did I want to say? There are so many things. Yes, okay. The other thing is what has become banal is the presence of hyperscalers. Now, about 3 or 4 years ago, it was like, oh my goodness, Amazon Web Services here. They're in a hotel across the way, right? They were in a hotel across the way. And they become closer, and it's not just Azure, of course, Microsoft Azure is that, Google, big presence, and not alone, there are other hyperscalers out there from other parts of the world. They have become part of the fabric of the industry, and I think positively. I think a lot of fears out there in terms of them taking over. I do think there's a lot of real good things that can happen, but in the partnerships that, there are new products out there. Azure had a new product out there for operators, but it was a lot of love bombing, let's say, from the AWSs of the world. I don't find that necessarily a negative thing. Besides them, just a couple of other companies I think worth mentioning, and I suspect Mike will get into it as well, but it wasn't just about the Ericssons and the Ciscos and the Nokias. There are also some smaller companies I think made a really big impact for a couple of reasons. One I'd like to draw is a company called Salona. So Salona is a company that's in the private networking space, and it seems to be it's done a lot of deals with some major faces in the industry, and essentially empowering a lot of these private networking activities. How much this very small company can scale is questionable, but they're doing someone will buy them soon. Buy shares if you can. By the way, I'm not allowed as part of my contract to invest in any digital companies that I may be researching, so I'm not going to get the upside. But anyway, and the other company I wanted to mention is Rakuten of Japan. And just before the lockdown, my last major trip was to Japan. And one of the things I did was see Rakuten, and that was in February of 2020. And two things about that. One, Rakuten, because they were so fizzing and exciting. They were trying to decide what they should do, and they had some ideas, and they had technology, and they've been selling their technology. So they're sort of like another vendor, competitor to the Ericssons and of Nokias of the world. Interestingly, at that point, they were trying to decide whether they should get into the enterprise market. Still haven't. It's not a trivial endeavor, folks. And the other reason I was in Japan at the time was to help one of my clients decide whether they wanted to do business with one of the hyperscalers in terms of selling them some assets. And it's interesting how I think the attitudes have changed. Anyway, let me stop because there's so many other things we could talk about, but I'm sure we'll get back to it. I'll hand over to Mike, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Our real expert, veteran.
Well, I'm a veteran, yes, but first of all, thanks to WiTT for inviting me again to be here, and also for techUK for
I was
hosting
just
it.
wondering if they could host this event without you, like
Easily.
you'll just game crash.
Easily.
There we go. Mike's a stalwart.
But I think one of the things I noticed about Mobile World Congress this year is actually the diversity had gone down a bit. So let me be clear that I think when I look around the room, you could see the diversity of nationality was not quite as high as it usually is, but also the gender diversity was not high as it used to be. So I personally think that Barcelona is back. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But I think we need to still do some work on diversity. A few things that stood out to me. First of all, I think one of the great things that GSMA does is brings the industry together, but also some of the statistics you make available are really helpful for everybody. Some of the statistics about customer numbers or investment or jobs, those sort of things. And just to take some headline numbers, 5.3 billion customers using mobile at the end of 2021, rising to 5.7 billion. This is a huge industry. That's unique mobile subscribers. If you take the non-unique, in other words, people have more than one device, it was 8.3 rising to 8.8 billion. Now that's just mobile devices. But when you add in the Internet of Things, or if you add in some of the larger numbers to do with connected devices or machines, 15.1 billion rising to 23.3 billion. This is a huge industry where the numbers actually are startling. The size of the industry, $1.08 trillion, expected to rise by 2025 to $1.16 trillion. The impact on society is enormous. So it's a global industry, and therefore we need to treat that global industry with respect. I think some of the criminal things that are happening in Ukraine are dreadful, and I am really pleased that our industry stood up to actually step back and say, look, hang on, Russia, what are you doing here? And I think both the operators, some of the key vendors, they all move very quickly. Well done, GSMA, to making sure there were no real Russian conflicts issues within the event itself. Yes, it's a global industry, but we need to make sure that we move together. But when peace breaks out, let's talk about it. But I think until we do see some peace, frankly, it needs some more work. It's amazing also when we think about the smartphone being 15 years old, 2007, maybe the iPhone launch as a marker 15 years ago. The numbers of smartphones rising from 75% to 84%. That's quite stunning in such a short period of time. 75% smartphones by the end of 2021. Other vendors, not just Apple, apply, but 84%, that's huge. But at the same time, you made the point, Kim, about internet access, and frankly, we need to do more about internet access. And what was not so obvious was how people are thinking about how to deliver better internet access for everybody. Not the plumbing, not the connectivity, but also making sure that the content is relevant to people in every society in the right languages, making sure that e-commerce is available to everybody, making sure the internet itself is relevant. That needs more work. Now, that's not criticism of GSMA. It needs more work from all of us. Because if we don't deal with the inclusion of the internet, frankly, this industry will not grow. We may well talk about Internet of Things, as in connected cars or connected street furniture, but if we don't think about inclusion, we're missing a major trick. I also was really impressed by the number of stands, 1,900 or so stands there. The UK had 66. So I was part of the UK Department of International Trade delegation. We were supporting 66 UK companies, maybe not as big as 1,900, but 66 companies, the majority of which have said they're going next year. You know, they all had a good time. They met customers, they met collaborators. In some cases, they met investors. In some cases, they could see ways in which they could grow in a totally different way to when the hybrid event or the shutdown occurred in the last 2 years. So for them, Barcelona is really back. This is a trade show, and we need to not forget that it's a trade show, but people meet people. Businesses do businesses with people. We need to make sure we can help them do that. I think the points made about private networks and verticals were well made. Certainly that was a big story of the show. We had certainly quite a few companies in that area. I saw Cellnex, for example, that are already doing lots of great work in the private network space, not just in the UK, but in Spain and other parts of Europe. And they're actually offering enterprises all sorts of key areas of solutions that would not have been thought about. The announcement earlier last year about BAI, getting the 20-year plus contract for the London Underground to put private network solutions on a wholesale basis, on a neutral host basis, is important for the London as a whole, but also it's important for the London Underground and all the users who don't really get Wi-Fi every day or even cellular underground every day. Some of the areas of innovation around cloud and Open RAN and softwareization, yes, there was a lot of hype in that area, but that's a mega trend. And if any of you got sons or daughters who want jobs, there's a big job to do in the whole softwareization space, because networks and networks of networks will require better softwareization going forward. And I think that's a theme that GSMA needs to do more on going forward.
I love how you keep looking at me every time you're saying what we need to do more on my team.
No.
I should be.
This is not a threat. Let me come on to something you've done really well. I mean,
No, I don't need to.
But I mean, we were pleased that the UK government committed to the Mobile for Development programme. We've been committed to it for over 10 years. We've put some more investment in that area because actually, frankly, you can't think about just technology innovation for its own sake. Inclusion is important. We've had a long-standing government commitment to mobile for development, and actually from the early days of M-Pesa and mobile money and innovation in Africa, frankly, the GSMA has done a stunning job. So you deserve the award that occurred on the Wednesday Mobile World Congress from our Minister for Europe, and as such, that will help, I would hope, mobile for development work in a different way. Because my point earlier on about inclusion means that we have to think about different societies, because not everybody is thinking about 5G. Not everybody is thinking about 6G. They're actually thinking about, do they have bread on the table? Do they have water available? Do they have, the basic needs? And frankly, digital, mobile is the most inclusive digital technology on the planet. If we don't get it right for mobile, we won't get it right for anything else. So pleased that we were able to announce that as a mobile for development contribution, but pleased, frankly, of over 10 years worth of fantastic work you've done there. I think we saw signs of innovation going into the longer term. So I think somebody mentioned 6G briefly. What is 6G? I don't know. It's not been invented yet. But we've had generations every 8 to 10 years of mobile technology, and really 6G will come along by 2030. But what we can expect is demands for more capacity and more capability, higher speeds. We are in the gigabit society. We need higher speeds, but we also need more capacity. So 6G was being discussed about from a research point of view. How do you get people to collaborate? Frankly, we need to get the collaboration working well for everybody as well, not just big superpowers, let's call them USA or China. What about making sure we actually collaborate on an international basis? I think satellite was a bit lower profile this year than I thought. If I think about Elon Musk, who was involved with last year's event, certainly he had a lot of pizzazz and excitement and all that stuff. But satellite is a mode that really has been undernourished, I think, for a while. We can see Wi-Fi and cellular came together with the smartphone, but actually satellite has a role to play, particularly in rural areas, particularly in remote areas, over the sea, over the mountains, and we can see more investment coming into that space. Today from the USA, Rivada Networks also announced that they're going to do satellite neutral hosts in North America. That'll be interesting to see how that happens. It will take time. Have they got the spectrum? All sorts of questions. But satellite is an important area. Having the head of the FCC there was a coup. You know, to get the head of the FCC from the USA there, she wasn't given any tricky questions about how to avoid 5G interference between aircraft and cellular. But she was willing to say we need to release more spectrum in the States for US needs. She was willing to say that we need to plan longer term for things like 6G initiatives. So having somebody like the head of the FCC there is great. Regulation and policy need to work together better. And I think the ministerial summit, I didn't attend it, but I hear there was some good dialogue there. That's really useful. If you don't involve ministers, you don't get the policy input. If you don't say to ministers what you could do and link it to regulation, it misses a trick. So I think keep the ministerial summit going. That's important to all of us. Frankly, it's not just about inclusion, it's also about how do we move this society forward. And just to finish, I had one of the privileges of my life to be mentioned in a book by the Global Telecom Women's Network and their 30th anniversary, the Mobile Century. And they chose to squeeze me between a couple of famous females in the book. Isabel Mara, who obviously is a former colleague of yours from GSM Association, but also Claire Sibthorpe, because of the alphabet, of course, and Jennifer Schenker, who some of you know well. So to be one of the few men mentioned in the Mobile Century in the 30th anniversary of the Global Telecoms Women's Network, and the dinner I attended on the Monday was a super treat. Happy to take any questions of other reflections, but I really enjoyed it. And thanks for putting on a bloody good show.
This event, and you deserve to be in any book that is written in that regard. Questions, and Cristina, I think, is online and prepared to take questions too. Questions, comments, thoughts. Annette.
Yeah, actually got two questions, but I'll ask the first one first, and then other people have a go. One thing that troubles me about the way things are moving, mobile and digital, is the issue of single point of failure. And you see it all over the place. So if somebody gets to the top of the queue and they find they can't get the app going on their phone, they arrive at the airport and they've run out of power. And lots of, I mean, those are trivial examples. But it does seem to me that we are moving quite strongly towards everything being on a very small single device. It's quite easy to lose, and it's a complete single point of failure in our life. And I just wonder whether that aspect of using mobile phones, of developing our whole lives around a digital world, has resonated at all within the conference.
Who'd like to take that first?
I mean, I'll start. I actually disagree with your point. I don't think it's all one device. The whole point is we're using more and more devices. And that phone that you're holding right now will probably become, well, okay, you're not holding a phone, but well, if you were, why aren't you holding a phone? Why aren't you holding a phone? I think it's we're using more devices. Actually, I don't think it's a single device. So, but I take the point about dependency on power and this and that and the other. But those devices are going to be embedded into our glasses, right? That connectivity. It's going to be on your wrist. So there will be no single point of failure. There'll be multiple points, right? So I'm not sure I agree with you on to begin with. I think one issue, which I think was clear at Mobile World Congress, there aren't enough 5G devices yet. That was very much the case. Not that it's really a device-led show, but I think that's what we need to work on. That's one of the issues I would say. So I guess I disagree with you.
So I'll have to agree because I have very recent experience where actually my battery did die because I'm not on top of life and I don't charge my phone overnight unless my husband does it for me. But actually was navigating using my phone. Battery died, and then it took me 30 minutes to realize or remember that actually the car's got sat nav and I can use that while I was waiting for my phone to recharge. Anyway, we won't go into it. So I do agree, and I think I come from a slightly different perspective that we're working mostly in LMICs and the work that we're doing. So obviously taking a step in that direction. One of the key barriers to digital inclusion is access, and it's not access to phones necessarily, it's access to all the enablers. So the connectivity obviously been mentioned several times, but also electricity and some of those other things. So I think it's not really in response to like, is putting everything. I think we can only do it if all those other things come along. And so I don't think there was a huge amount of emphasis other than on the network side of things at the event. And certainly I think when you're talking about are we being inclusive of all the different regions, there are other problems. So I remember when 5G came up a few years ago, Africa was there saying, please don't, we're not ready for this. We're just trying to get 3G, 4G up. And this is the case, right? Like they're always just trying to keep up. And I think we need to do a better job and pull everyone along, but not just everyone in the mobile space, but the other enablers. So there is possibly not enough talk of that yet. We need to shout a bit more.
Cristina, would you like to come in on that? Sorry, you're on mute still.
I'm on mute, sorry. I'm a little bit with Camille and a little bit with Kim, I have to say. I totally agree on the devices. I think we will be relying on a lot more devices. The form factor, I used to have it in my hand. I gave it to my daughter of my mobile phone, has been the same for quite a long time. But there is an evolution, not only glasses, virtual screens in front of us. Who knows what is going to come? So I don't think the little rectangular device that we're used to right now is going to be the only one in our hand. At the same time, I think the network and the reliability of the network is something that every single player out there is considering in the context of my raising my point on sustainability. I think sustainability, but also how can you power base station in a greener way, but are in more isolated location in rural area, etc. There's a lot of work that goes into making sure that actually you have a reliable green connection out there. So I think that is a point that is true. I think it was clear from the sustainability, maybe not so much from the reliability point of view. And I think reliability, when you need connectivity, whichever is the device, is going to become a lot more important.
Thank you. Mike, do you have anything more to add on that one?
Well, I remember when my father in the 1960s used to have to queue up to make a phone call to the USA. And I actually think mobile has added a lot more utility and mobility and usability, but that doesn't mean we should stand still. And I think energy and our reliance on apps in particular means, and coverage, means we need to spend some more time on usability. And I think Kim said it as well already. Let's work on it.
One other point that also on the reliability, which is cyber, the vulnerability of the networks and making sure that they fall over when they get an attack.
Thank you. Penelope?
Yeah, horrible back to rural and reliability, connectivity. And I mean, I live in one of the most wonderful places, farming, we need sensors everywhere. If we're meant to feed the world, and it's getting tough without fertilizer, we have got to be able to have a sensor on our compost to know what's happening to it. Yeah, you lovely guys, move your things to another direction. All our electricity cards go straight out. And as somebody who provides, I put in my own fibre, I put in my own RTK, which shows my tractors where they are, because in other countries, the RTK is provided by the mobile. What will connectivity, will competition, will we be allowed to have something to provide our own mobile with private networks so that we can connect our Wi-Fi, our tractors, our sensors, and actually our villages, which are in valleys, because motorways are much nicer to provide service for than rural little valleys that get nothing. And when people don't understand what's going to happen when we lose our telephones, because landlines, rural old people don't understand about that, and you can't get a signal inside unless you actually know how to press your Wi-Fi, whatever.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? I mean, copper switch off has to be completed by 2025 here in the UK. So that's a lot of elevator alarms that are not going to work, let alone people alarms. So you make there are several hundred use cases that are still dependent on copper. But the point that you make is very important. And think about why private networks are such a potent, important development. Because it's not just about, right now, a lot of the emphasis is on manufacturing and, I'm going to control my robot with sub X 5 millisecond use cases. But, frankly, what you're talking about is equally important. And the power can be in your hands, potentially with that more access to spectrum, as well as, and a complementary to the fibre. I mean, my brother-in-law is a farmer up near Selby, and he has that issue. His children have not had the best broadband connection, so their education has had issues and things like that, let alone connecting his enormous tractors. So I know what you're talking about, but that's some of the potential that could be addressed, right? With new sort of wholesale models, by the way, where you actually can pay, you would be paid for some of the access that you could provide to others, perhaps.
Wow. So just to what you said, Mike, about satellite not being really part of the conference. Satellite
is an example, potentially, yeah.
Using small amounts of data for GPS and for tractors and IoT. Satellite is a really good gap for that. So back to your point, Mike, about
I love the big bid on the satellite thing last. Anyway.
But satellite companies are willing to partner more and more.
I know.
Yeah. Okay.
That's great.
May I just add, I think the language needs to move towards real technology neutrality. I think the way the regulation works, and maybe Cristina Data might disagree with me, but we still have very much wireless regulation and wireline regulation.
Yes.
And we need to have a more fluid approach across the boundaries.
Quite right. Yeah.
If we think about the fiber optic rollout today, it's very heavy on fiber, but it doesn't allow really the integration of wireless solutions, and the same in reverse. So we need to have a more fluid approach to the regulation in this space, where it's not determined by spectrum conditions alone, but allows some of the issues. So I would like the language to move towards indoors and outdoors and rural and remote. And if we then start to think about indoors and outdoors, rural and remote, you start to think about the solutions would apply to each of those categories. Satellite may be great for remote and rural, but it may not be so good for indoors. Let's be clear about that. At the end of the day, cellular is probably stronger on the outdoors front, but may not reach all rural or remote areas. We can't cover the sea very easily or the mountains very easily. So I think the language needs to move towards indoor, outdoor, rural and remote, and then think about a more technology neutral approach, which could be Wi-Fi, cellular, satellite, fixed wireless access, the range to be all included together.
Well, I can also say that the broadband stakeholder group is looking very hard at, and Penelope was excellent at least providing me with some insight into what was happening in rural areas. And we are looking at exactly what you're suggesting, Mike, the technology neutrality and bringing in more people into this forum that include satellite, that includes digital, that includes the AWSs and providers, but in a technology neutral way.
I think Cristina had a point too, Stephanie.
Unfortunately, I think Matt's gone off to get. Can you see her?
Yes.
May I?
Oh, yes.
Come
Yes,
in.
yes, please. I'm afraid I can't. My screen's just. Yes,
Okay.
please.
Sorry, I just
Carry
wanted.
on.
Yes, I just wanted to sort of almost answer Mike, and in a way, in our latest document on mobile spectrum demand, that's exactly how we're trying to address the problem in an indoor-outdoor, rural and remote versus urban, and consider the fact that in many cases Wi-Fi is an alternative, and Wi-Fi is fiber, or Wi-Fi is FWA. So we totally understand that technologies are converging. There could be different solutions for different problems that all deliver the same type of connectivity, and all deliver, I'm almost going back to the point that I was making before, the reliability that you need and the capacity that you need when you need it. If I could also reply on the point on, I think the lady from the audience, apologies, I didn't pick up the name, about connectivity in rural areas for farming and to provide connectivity to tractors, etc. So we have also done a lot of work in making spectrum available for those type of solutions, both leveraging what is the mobile spectrum that MNOs have got but may not be using in those locations, and other bits of spectrum that can be used on a localized basis. And we've worked with DCMS actually through the test beds and trial solution in rural areas and supporting agri-tech solution. And we're in constant discussion, because we also appreciate that one day you may need spectrum covering one side of a field, and the following week you need spectrum covering the other side of a field, and you cannot really have a movable base station. So we are constantly trying to understand what are the needs of stakeholders out there, because we want to make sure that at least spectrum, as much as we can work on that, is not a barrier to delivering the services that you want to deliver and achieve a digital transformation, and therefore sustainability and everything that comes with it.
Thank you. Penelope, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot.
What suggestions do you have?
It's boring, sorry, for everybody, but a lot of agri-tech and rural don't understand, and I don't really understand the spectrum. But, you know, LoRaWAN is brilliant and much the best for a lot of agri-tech things, because you only need a tiny bit and you don't want to waste a lot of money on, but we have, it is a lot of silos and no innovation.
So maybe just a minor comment, but so we have an innovation fund. It's actually coming up to an end now for connectivity as well. So I think, and it's focused again in two different markets in Africa. And although I can't share all the technical details of like exactly where the innovation lies, but I think there might be some emerging innovations coming out of other markets that could potentially be replicated here even or not. But I think there definitely is innovation happening here. It's more about how do we scale these things. And I think this is where we also see the operators partnering with some of these players, the smaller startups that are trying to make inroads here, becoming a really important factor for scaling and actually seeing some of these solutions become a success more widely. So yeah, but just to mention that there could be some other interesting areas outside of the UK worth looking at.
Interesting to draw them in. As maybe any other questions? Comments?
I'm not sure if Jane Vincent is still on the Teams call, but she wanted to make a comment about the Glomo Awards. So I don't know, Jane, are you on the call still?
Yes, I am here.
Great. Would you like to tell us about the awards?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, I think it's kind of already been covered a little bit from Mike's contribution. But I just wanted to pick up on the last point, actually, and the earlier points about inclusion, you know, where through the mobile awards, they're able to focus on issues which are happening in different parts of the globe, and perhaps take away from the focus on the technology and then look at the realities of things that are happening. So the award that I judged, which was looking at outstanding mobile contributions to the United Nations Special Development Goals, the winner, if we can put it that way, Safaricom, is kind of providing a digital truck that's driving out to places and providing opportunities for people to be able to acquire digital skills to be able to apply for jobs. And we have to remember that with there's a lot of places in the world where people are kind of dealing not yet able to kind of access this technology, that we're all kind of glibly talking about fantastic solutions, and I understand the issues about kind of remote driving of combine harvesters and so on, but there's a huge gap between those who have and those who don't have, and I'd like to kind of commend the Global Mobile Awards for actually bringing some of this to the fore.
Thank you, Jane. Mike?
Well, I think, Jane, great to hear your voice again. I think also it's great, not just the awards salute excellence and innovation, but I think also highlight some things that need to be done. One of the areas I'm not sure stood out quite so well from the Glomos this year was digital health. And I think if we think about the COVID pandemic, actually there were huge innovations that really stood out when it came to how mobile operators played a difference, when it came to linking together IT systems and supporting people who had to work from home. So I think, if anything, some of the digital health side has not been picked up enough in the Glomos themselves. It was less evident in Mobile World Congress 3 weeks ago, but there were certainly things like the European Connected Health Alliance, who had a whole summit in 4 years from now. And actually, I think, if anything, that's a growth area for this industry, where health and telecoms work together better, not just on wearables, not just on apps, but actually on helping to make access to healthcare more inclusive. And frankly, we need to do a lot more in that area.
Thank
and
you.
Can I just pick up on that? I think to some extent the Glomos are kind of a self-selection, and that maybe people were too busy dealing with health issues to kind of nominate companies. But yeah.
Well, I might disagree slightly. I was actually one of the judges for the COVID Best Pandemic Response, the COVID-19 pandemic response and recovery, and there were some good entries from service providers as well as some newer companies in the healthcare space. So worth looking at some of the names of those that were shortlisted and finally won too, but maybe not as much as there should have been.
Well, I think even if they're in the Glomos, I think they were less evident on the exhibition floor.
No, that's true.
So if we think about the 1900 stands, there were not as many as I would have thought would be there with health. In 4 years from now, there were some good ones, but I think there's some more to be done in that area. And I think it's a theme for the next 3 years, really, rather than necessarily looking back.
Michelle?
Sorry, I missed, and you already discussed it before I came in, but you had mentioned something about the softwareization, if I use the right word. I haven't been in a number of years. Is the SaaSification of businesses and the platform requirements a big topic at Mobile World Congress? Because the requirements are changing quite dramatically. Asking providers. Just very curious what kind of debate or appetite, we see on the floor in the trade association or in the trade environment on that topic.
I think there's huge appetite in that area, but it's driven by key principles to say, can you reduce the cost of network capital? Can you actually improve interoperability between networks? Can you accelerate the time for products to get through to customers? Can you improve the open applications interface? So I think the whole story about open architecture was definitely there. I think the how is still missing. I think there's a bit of cloudification over there, as opposed to the how, how do you implement some of this stuff over here? And I think some of that relates to standards. Who will certify this software package compared to that? Who will give you assurance that that will work in a resilient environment? Who will make sure it works? And I don't think it can work in a kind of crowdsourced type way. I think it needs more than hackfests. It needs practical mechanisms that say, if you do this, this will help you to make your network more efficient, or your product get to the customer more quickly, or maybe make sure that the overall efficiency is improved. So I don't think there was enough of that, frankly. I think the cloud story, causes a fog as opposed to the softwareization initiative, which is really needed big time now. And we're not going to get cellular and Wi-Fi or cellular and satellite to work together properly unless it's really addressed, including standards, including people getting in the same room together to discuss which software language, how to get those interfaces working. There's a lot of room for change there. And that's why I think there's lots of jobs in that area, lots of opportunities.
Annette, did you have a second question?
Yes, it's the second topic that I'd just like to hear a little bit from the panel about, which is China. We talked about Russia, and it's very obvious why Russia is a pariah. But China in the mobile industry has also been treated a little bit that way. Now, I'm perfectly sure that GSMA doesn't want to get into being a political arbitrator in any sense, nor should it. But China still has a different position to much of many of the other countries that I suspect were there. And I suspect they did have quite a big pavilion. I don't know, I wasn't there. But I'd just be interested to get your views on whether China, whether there are problems around China having such a big presence in mobile.
I'll make one comment, and I am working on 6G, for instance. I'm actually on second project looking at 6G and the potential of 6G. And I suppose what concerns me about 6G is it's becoming already, before it becomes real, because I'm investigating why would we need 6G, for what context, what are the use cases, but it's already potentially splintered geographically. That's my big worry. And China has made a big push in that space. And for maybe uses we might not appreciate in certain countries. But still, the broader point is, as Mike said, we need unity, and we may have fragmentation going forwards. But I can tell you the Huawei's, the ZTEs of the world were welcome and highly populated stands, and they continue to drive innovation. But if it's hermetically sealed to one particular geography or certain clusters, I worry about that. 30 years ago, like now, I was living in Moscow in a time of hyperinflation. And I remember, working in Washington, D.C. when we were having discussions about whether, we should grant an export license to Cisco routers because, we had COCOM restrictions. And I'm concerned about certain bad habits, bad things repeating in some ways. Anyway, let me stop.
Well, I'll ask the panel one last question, and then we'll have to disengage for now until our next meeting in May. But I just wonder, what do you think? And I'd like to, two things. What are you going to see in 2023 when I suspect Mobile World Congress will be closer to back to normal, as long as we aren't engaged in World War III? And then where do you see it in the next 5 years? What are going to be the hot topics? It's good.
So 5 years or 7 years? Because
I would like to get out your crystal ball and,
short term, the appetite for slicing is ramping. I think that will continue. Maybe we'll see some more. We need to see that industrialized. So I'm hoping that happens. That is more evident in 2023. The metaverse is not going away. But perhaps we'll see some more rational usage of that. That's what comes to mind immediately. And what I'd like to see more presence from verticals, more enterprises actually being at the show and speaking. I remember it was such a big deal when the automotive industry turned up at Mobile Congress a few years ago. I'd like to see more from, manufacturing, more that type of dialogue, because I think a lot of discussion is still hypothetical. So I think there's a lot more cross-industry dialogue that needs to happen. That's what I'd like to see short-term and long-term.
I'm going to say 3D for 2023. So data.
Just 3. Sorry.
Well, deliberately 3. Data, diversity, and distribution. So just taking each in turn. The data growth is going through the roof. That will cause more capacity requirements. That will cause more investment. So I think data growth will drive a lot of what we see in 2023 and 2025 or 6, whatever you say. I think diversity, I think, frankly, we need diversity of vendors, diversity of talent. We need diversity much more towards the software route. I think much more diverse approaches than we've traditionally had. It's not driven by regulation alone. It's got to be more diverse on a broader basis. Distribution, I say that quite simply because these networks are becoming more and more complex. So I think we're going to see different approaches to distribution to deal with different sectors, to deal with different countries. It's not just about the number of operators. I think the distribution side is going to change. And also when you think about fintech or digital health, or whether you think about connected cars, the distribution channels are more likely to be much more diverse as well. I think within distribution, I'd include systems integration, whether it's for the enterprise or for the carriers. I think that also will change. So we'll see new systems integrator players on the distribution front. So 3Ds, data, diversity, and distribution.
Thank you. Kim, and then Cristina, you're next.
Yes, so I am gonna say something along the lines of, yes, I'm on. Sorry, I never know whether I'm the mic is on.
You
or
are.
not. Sorry.
No.
Yes, it's whether sustainability in the future will actually drive the way networks are being deployed, the way it will be the first port of call for many. We're only seeing energy prices going up, and they will continue to go up. So will sustainability, and read it across as cost reduction, be the driver of how we develop networks? And around the point that Mike was making, a lot more data and a lot more devices, a lot more information about us being transferred and communicated on different networks, whether at some point that we need to have a sort of ethical debate about the use of all of this data within the context of the Mobile World Congress. And then I'm gonna be cheeky and say, will it need to continue to be Mobile World Congress in the context of Mike saying you need to have fiber and mobile Wi-Fi? What's the difference? It's all enabling that wireless connectivity. So should it actually be wider to become more inclusive of all of the different sectors, of all of the different services that will need the level of connectivity that is required in the future? So those are my 3 sort of potential evolutions. Thanks. Is it really mobile, read cellular? That's my question. Yes.
Yes, I think Digital World Congress. Kim?
So I think I'll reflect on the things that I really want to see. Maybe not next. Let's be realistic as well in timelines, but let's just say in the upcoming MWCs, the 3 verticals, or the 3 key focus areas that I reflected on earlier. One was verticals, so that one will get covered and should be covered more. The third was innovation. That's naturally going to be covered. I think the second one around usage and the fact that that's 43% of the global population, I don't know how that's naturally going to come about unless there's a deliberate focus on it. And so I would love to see a lot more emphasis on that particular theme. And then, yes, definitely more regional representation, gender, all these populations that we're talking about reaching. I think we keep in the disability space as a mantra of nothing about us without us. And the reality is, if you're wanting to include everyone, you're going to have them part of the dialogue and part of the journey. And so, yeah, that would be my hope, is to see that representation even reflected at something like MWC. So, yeah.
Thank you. Can I just ask you to thank the panel and including Cristina, who participated in Extremis. So thank you very much. And thank you very much to techUK, Matt and Alex, for the use of their space and provision of wine and nibbles and